from Blockchain Embassy and Statebox team as well. And he's going to talk about law was code before code was law.
Thanks for the invitation to Jelle, Fabrice and the whole Statebox team. I met Jelle 2 years ago, I think, or even 3. It was at DEF CON something in Shanghai. And he told me about Statebox. And so my background is in both law and technology. I actually studied law properly. I'm an actual lawyer in Germany, in Berlin. But before I became a lawyer, I had been developing software for many years, and I really I look at the world like a software person, not like a lawyer, which today actually turns out to be a good thing, but for the 10 years when I studied law, I was more like a weird person that asked weird questions. Like, for example, why don't we use software to code contracts? Because a contract kind of looks like a piece of software when you get to the bottom of it. And stuff like that, and now, funnily enough, blockchain brought us all of this stuff, and I just want to mention a few of the things that are happening in the space. I guess I shouldn't stand in front of my slides, so maybe like this. I think I have 20 minutes to 30 minutes. Yeah. I have way too many slides, so I will skip some of them. First, I want to talk a bit about open innovation in law. Is that even a thing? And the answer is yes. Quick history, in the 13th century there emerged something that we refer to today as the Lex Mechatopia, which was basically a private body of rules made up by salesmen and traders that were engaged in cross-border trade, and that were in dire need of institutions that could resolve disputes between traders of goods in a very time-sensitive manner, right? And the courts at the time, if they even existed in this Victorian age, so to speak, they weren't really made for real-time dispute resolution, which on the other hand was necessary to prevent goods, for example, like food, to actually become bad. So there was a big need for a way to resolve disputes according to a standardized set of rules. And for lack of, a legal system, people just made their own. And it actually was very successful and existed for several hundred years until it was absorbed by the legal system. We have another version of this today, actually, which is the Creative Commons, which is, again, kind of the same. There is a new space called the cyberspace, and it makes the copying of digital information really cheap. And it ignores more or less copyright law. And so people were asking themselves, well, how can we actually make people respect certain rules around copyrightable goods? And what they came up with really is their own body of laws that nobody has to follow, but you can opt into it. And if you opt into the Creative Commons, you have a very clear and simple legal regime that works for the digital age of what kind of information you can share or not. And all of these ideas of open innovation in law have culminated into a movement that the lawyers call legal tech. And I'm doing some stuff there as well. And it really is built on 3 pillars. It's blockchain, it's law and AI, and it's something that we call industrialization, which is this idea that you can standardize a lot of the knowledge in law, and you can automate a lot of the processes in law, and thereby increase access to justice, make transaction costs lower, and in a really utopian future, maybe get rid of lawyers completely. Another summary of this, what is legal tech? It starts with standardizing legal knowledge and representing it in a machine-readable form. Once you've done that, you can automate a lot of the processes through software and connected devices, and ultimately you can disintermediate and get rid of lawyers. Now the specific focus of this talk will be about blockchain, this one pillar in legal tech. And to me, blockchain is a new normative environment, meaning it's an environment where I can stipulate rules and people can opt into being bound by those rules. And through this process, we can actually build up something like a legal system from the bottom up. And that seems very attractive. Yeah, none of you needs an explanation what blockchain is. Obviously, 2015 was a big year when The Economist kind of legitimized years of evangelism around blockchain with this single cover. And unfortunately, recently they published a new article saying that blockchain is complete shit. But the only thing I kind of want to highlight here, what blockchain does in a kind of really like high-level bird's-eye perspective, is our IT infrastructure today, which is obviously very centralized, can be decentralized through blockchain, and I mean, we've all seen this stuff. But what's really interesting is that on the bookkeeping level, we are in a decentralized world. Everybody keeps their own books, and we have a huge infrastructure of auditors and lawyers and courts to make sure that everybody keeps their books clean and synchronized and doesn't pretend to have spent money they didn't spend, or doesn't pretend to have had an income they didn't have. And interestingly, blockchain allows us to centralize everything on the bookkeeping level, because we've decentralized on the infrastructure level. So there is a huge centralization force on the bookkeeping level. I've talked to Aaron, I don't know where he sits about it, here, the idea of industry-specific blockchains, right? So the idea there being that, I don't know, the diamond industry, the bank industry, the insurance industry, the film industry, the music industry, all of them are currently experimenting with the idea of building their own blockchain, and thereby centralizing a lot of the bookkeeping that is currently being done, for example, about around license agreements and so on. And there are huge benefits to be expected from this around transaction costs. On the other hand, there are huge legal problems with this called competition law or antitrust law, right? So companies are actually not allowed to share a lot of information because it would destroy the price competition. So it's a big open question, how much can we actually centralize the bookkeeping through blockchain? What are the legal limits to this? Or where does our economic system stop making sense, which is built on the idea of competition and not on the idea of cooperation? Maybe also a little view of how I as a lawyer look at blockchain. For me, it's a techno-legal stack. It starts with a lot of technology, the internet and peer-to-peer protocols, but then immediately it goes up into a realm where it's kind of a mixed thing. So the governance, the consensus protocol of any given blockchain is a mixture of a social system and a technological system. And the blockchain that we talk about when we just talk about blockchain is really just one emerging layer out of the underlying techno and social things coming together. And obviously smart contracts, which is also what Statebox is working on, is really just the relationship layer on top of everything below. A few interesting things that blockchains allow us to do is, first of all, digital property. I guess this is the biggest innovation that blockchain brings us, this idea that we can manage who owns what fully digitally now. The name for this is tokens, obviously, as all of you know. Tokens were really the first application of, I think that's interesting, right? The first social application of blockchain was bookkeeping for other assets than the blockchain's native currency itself. It started with people encoding meta information into Bitcoin transactions around 2012. The counterparty protocol emerged and colored coins and all that stuff. And then 2015, Ethereum generalized this idea of creating tokens. And today we have a really interesting ecosystem of tokens. Tokens could be described as the digital identity of something that can be owned by somebody. And a token has various dimensions. It has a functional dimension, which really is the on-chain code of this token, which like for example, I'm wearing this t-shirt today of the Maker DAO, and these people, they have created a token that only has a functional dimension, meaning that everything that you can know about this token, everything that this token can do is represented as code on the blockchain. Whereas there are other tokens that have, I say, a representational dimension, meaning that they might have very little code on chain, like a standard ERC20 contract, but then off-chain you might have super complex decision processes around what is happening with this token, and none of this is then reflected on the blockchain. Same goes for, if you think of the gaming industry that is now experimenting with this idea of putting, you know, like a sword in World of Warcraft or something like that to represent it as a token on the blockchain. Well, I mean, the most interesting thing about this token then is really the sword in the game, and it's not the entry on the blockchain, right? So it can have many dimensions, such a token. Token classification, I guess all of you are familiar with this. I see 5 different classes of tokens today. We have our classical cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Then we have this supposedly new category called utility tokens, which Ethereum kind of invented, more or less. Legally speaking, they are completely identical. There's no difference. Then we have what I call app tokens. There, a token really represents a voucher, so it's like an Amazon voucher where you can just buy stuff at a specific company's store. And then now we have these new emerging categories, security tokens and asset tokens, and we'll see if something comes out of that or not. A kind of a subcategory that I see here is stable tokens. People are trying to create this idea of a price stable token on the blockchain. I think Victor, who's in the room, will probably tell us a bit about that later. It's probably impossible to build, but people still try. Also the makeup people, I really like them, but who knows. Interestingly, if you look at the relationship, okay, what is law going to regulate in the future? What is technology going to regulate in the future? What is the functional division between these two different areas of human activity, so to speak? I see clear trend towards more and more being done through technology. If we look at a very simple ERC20, standard ERC20 token contract, it's not even this, doesn't even implement the standard interface. It's just I think the smallest possible token contract you can find on the Ethereum website. And you can see that the assets are defined digitally, the emission is done digitally, the trading is digitally through code, the investments and the governance can all be done through code. So the question is, what is law actually still for? So now I'm skipping random slides. Exactly, what is the future of law, right? In the past, it was all about stipulating rules, what you should do and should not do, and it was all about the agents in the system internalizing these rules and then voluntarily adapting their behavior to these rules, and if they misbehave, they would be punished, but only after the fact. And okay, the light isn't that good here, but it says access denied, so this technological future where we're going towards, it's not about agents internalizing rules anymore, it's about technology giving you a set of possibilities, and you can choose one of these possibilities or none of them, but it's not about you having the freedom to actually break any rules. So the future of law is really just about being a baseline regulation and possibly regulating market access, but the behavior of the agents in the markets will be solely determined through technology. A very smart scholar in the UK calls this we're going from prescription as a mechanism of regulation or governance to a mechanism of possibilities, right? So instead of being told what to do, you just do what you can do, or you don't do anything at all. But wait, did I say future? Yes. This is already happening. If we look at the ICO space today, really, nobody cares about law anymore, right? If you're an ICO team today, you really just look at 4 things. I want a blockchain-friendly financial markets authority that basically just says, okay, what you do is cool, go ahead. I want a country with political stability so that the government doesn't freeze my assets on the bank account. I want low taxes because, I mean, why pay money to a state that I don't care about at all? I'm just there to sell tokens. And fourth, obviously, I need access to the classical banking system because people still would like to get, a lot of people still want their salaries and wages in fiat, which makes sense. So in a way, the law has already taken a very, very big step back. And instead we see self-regulation. So up until today there is no law on tokens, and which means that, for example, if you're selling a token that represents a cryptocurrency like Ether, Bitcoin, whatever, there is not even a requirement to identify your investors. Like, you don't even have to know where their money comes from, which we call the source of funds or anti-money laundering regulation. However, if you do an ICO, if you're an investor in ICO today, you probably know that you most of the time have to do KYC. Why did that happen? It's very simple. The bank said, well, you know, guys, if you want to convert your cryptocurrencies into fiat, you better tell us where that money comes from, because otherwise we cannot accept it for compliance reasons. And suddenly everybody in the space does KYC voluntarily because they want something. We have interactive coin offerings as another trend that tries to find a fairer price for tokens in an ICO. We have this project by Consensus, I think, the Messari database, that just tries to create a list of best practices, how to do token sale and so on. So we see self-regulation by the community. And I think the last interesting trend I want to show you guys is how we are reinventing legal institutions in the blockchain right now. First of all, of course, is dispute resolution. The most important project here is the Kleros protocol, developed by a really interesting team. And what they try to do is they try to just purely with the game theory and incentives try to build a justice system based on like crowdsourcing of jurors and so on that can deliver dispute resolution as a service on a fully trustless infrastructure with no identities. Right? Yeah, they also have this website, CrowdJury. And another interesting aspect, and this is where we also again cross territory with the Statebox project, is this idea of smart legal contracts. So the idea that we take the best of both worlds, we take what is good about legal contracts, we take what is good about smart contracts, and we put it together to create something that has more value for everybody. In general, what are the advantages of smart contracts, software-based contracts? Well, they are automatically executed, they run autonomously, they rationalize a lot of the efforts around writing contracts. So just as a reality check for you guys, as a lawyer today, the only two pieces of software that you need is Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Word. This is the standard. There are no templating libraries, there are no IDEs, there is no type checking, there is no nothing. Lawyers have none of this. And now only through the smart contract stuff are we going into a world where lawyers actually start to look into the possibilities of such kind of software. And obviously by executing smart contracts on a blockchain, we get a lot of benefits like enforceability of contractual claims, even if there are no institutions to enforce the claims. There are a lot of projects around smart contracts now raising absurd amounts of money. I mean, this was all 2017. Right now, nobody of them would get any money, I guess. Yeah, lots of interesting projects. To me, the most interesting one really is Legalese. They try to build a new programming language for law. So they start with a meaning and then try to find a language that represents the meaning they wanna have, and then build a language out of this. It's a very interesting company. It's holacratic, organized. It has a huge community. You should check them out if what I'm telling you sounds interesting to you. We have Aragon, obviously, which also made a huge ICO last year. What is smart and legal contract intermixing looking like today? It's very, very like basic what we're doing. What's possible today is that you kind of take a smart contract and you take a legal contract, you take a hash of the legal contract, you put it into the smart contract and vice versa, and then you have this kind of interlinking bridge between these two documents. It's not really sexy, but it's very simple to achieve. The next step would be really this idea of a legal programming language, where you have one source document it's written in a formal language, and then you can compile this document into a human-readable document or in an executable code document. And this is what Legalese tries to do. This is, I think, something that Statebox could at some point be able to do. Fabrizio is nodding his head, so I'm very happy to hear that. This is what a legal programming language could look like. This is by the Legalese guys. I don't think they have an interpreter for this, so they cannot really do anything with it. It's more like pseudocode, but what it could look like. So it's interesting if you look at it, right? You have keywords like obligation, party, and all the legal terms, but it's so that they use the Lisp-like language, and you can immediately like this is way more readable than any legal contract out there, right? Which is just a wall of text, and you're totally lost, and one comma can totally change the meaning of the text. So this is already a huge improvement, and I think it will only get better from there. Maybe one last interesting observation as a difference in design principles. Legal contracts really spend most of their effort in trying to define well-formed consequences if things should go wrong, if all the assumptions made by the parties don't become true. And so you have a typical legal contract says all the interesting things on the first page, and then the rest of the pages are just, well, if this goes wrong, then that happens, this goes wrong, that happens. Smart contracts work the other way around. They really just specify state transitions that are valid, and everything else just cannot happen because the network takes care of it. That seems like an amazing, way more efficient solution to all of this, but the reality is obviously smart contracts cannot predict the future. Nobody can. So even if you use smart contracts, the determinism of the code cannot really match the dynamic evolution of the future. So we still need dispute resolution, we still need lawyers, we still need all of that in the future. It's just gonna come in a different package. We'll skip all of that. Interestingly, just 2 or 3 years ago, there was a Nobel Prize handed out for this very basic insight that has taken the shape of legal realism in law, which is that, well, no contract will ever be perfect because the future is unknown. And a guy called Hart or something like that got a Nobel Prize in economics for that 3 years ago. And so what I'm asking for is basically blockchain realism, right? Let's build smart contracts that have the ability to actually perform in the way that we expect them to. And that requires smart legal contracts and dispute resolution. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Yeah,
Questions?
Sorry, what? That's just it's like a fingerprint.
Okay, so this is a kind of a naughty question to ask a lawyer.
Like
but once the law is unambiguous and it's sort of coded in this way, then what do we need lawyers for?
So I'm the first guy that wants to get rid of lawyers, right? Because I don't really see myself as one. But I think we will actually always need lawyers because, as I just said, there will always be a need for dispute resolution because the future is unknown. And when you have a dispute, you really want people to decide your case based on the same set of rules that they used for the last case and that they will use for the next case. That's what we call justice, right? You want the same cases being decided identically and different cases being decided differently. And that is why we have law. That's the whole reason, right? So
Yeah, but that's not why we have lawyers, right? That's why we have law and justice.
Exactly, it's why we have law, and lawyers are people that just decided to know everything there is to know about law and offer their services in the market, right? And I think the body of rules we will have in the future will not be less complex, it will be equally complex or more complex. We will just have better tools to manage the complexity, but I think it will still need a special profession of people that choose to waste their whole life on just understanding all of this.
Thanks.
Any more questions?
guys.